Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
This morning we continue in our study of the book of Revelation. We're in chapter 21. We began there last week. We began to speak of the new heaven, the new earth, those things associated with it. We're going to pick up this morning in verse 9. And there came unto me one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto stone most precious, even like jasper stone, clear as crystal. And the wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and the gates 12 angels, and the names written thereon were the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed, to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and breadth and height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto glass, unto clear glass. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. And then it begins to list some of those, and we'll see how far we get this morning in that. We, in the last week's lesson, were talking about the fact that after the great white throne, John sees a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven and earth had passed away, and he sees the new Jerusalem, the holy city, descending down out of heaven, and he describes it as a bride adorned for her husband. And of course, as we mentioned last week, very colorful. Again, I don't mean anything wrong by it, but our weddings in many cases are pretty drab. The bride is decked out in a white veil, a white dress, and, everything's just kind of washed out, with the idea, again, of white being of purity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in these other countries, white wedding dress was like bleh. We're not going to wear a white. And so wedding dresses were gold and red and all kinds of colors and threads and things woven into it. The veils were colorful, decked out in gold jewelry, rings, bracelets, necklaces with various kinds and colors of stones. And so, again, the description that God gives here, or John gives, of as a bride adorned for her husband, he begins to speak more upon that, on the different colors and all of that, as we go along. And he talks about the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Now he begins here in what we know as the 21st chapter, saying he saw that, and now he describes how it is that he saw that and how he came to do that. And in 11 it says, having the glory of God, and her light was like unto stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. You know, it would have to be for someone of the biblical times a fantastic image to see this city descending down out of heaven, filled with light and color. I mean, what kind of street lights they have back then? They didn't. You know, what kind of light bulbs they had? Again, they didn't. And if you've ever seen one of those little oil lamps that most time in the Bible it says is a candle, it's really these little oil lamps. You know, if you've had a flashlight that the battery's about ready to go dead in, just kind of glowing a little bit, well, that's what you get the light from an oil lamp. So can you imagine seeing in this vision this tremendous city coming down out of heaven, and it's filled with light? Now today, you know, we could compare that to, again, in the distance, looking at a New York City or some other city, and as we come, seeing all the street lights and all the things associated with it. But at that time, you know, the scripture says, city set on a hill can't be hid. That's true, but it wasn't because of some great beacon. It's just that everything else was so dark that even these little oil lamps could be seen a great distance. But John sees a city that is not lit, neither by the sun, nor of the moon, nor of the type of candles and lights that they're used to using. But he describes it as the glory of God is its light. It has no need of a sun or moon. Now, in the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth was without void, and we're told that darkness was upon the face of the deep. And then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then he divided the light from the darkness. And then in the process of that, he created the sun, the moon, and the stars also. But John sees this city, and this city is filled with the light or the glory of God. And so it is a spectacular thing for him to see in its light, in its color, in all the things that he sees. Now, are these things to be taken literally, or are they to be taken figuratively? I would say yes, both. Is not everything that we're seeing here is perhaps not necessarily to be taken absolutely literally, because everything else, or most of the things that we read about in the book of Revelation, are signs and symbols and are things that are meant, again, to represent, but there are parts and points and places where, again, it does speak literally. So again, when we look at the city, Again, we might literally think of these things, but again, at the same time, it helps us in a more figurative kind of way to appreciate the things that Jesus says in John 14, "In my Father's house are many mansions," or as some translations say, many dwelling places. Well, what exactly does that mean? So in the Revelation here, again, figuratively, literally, I'll again leave that how you want to scope all that out. But there's one thing that's absolute. There's plenty of room in the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem for as many people as can be saved. It's ridiculous to think that people say, and we've already addressed this, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but there's only going to be 144,000 because heaven's full. If 144,000 people would fill up what we're about to look at, you'd never see each other. I mean, that's kind of what we're going to look at here. The glory of God and the light thereof is clear as crystal. Most light at that time, other than the sun or the moon, was, as I said, somewhat of an orangish glowing light, a little bit of yellow maybe. But the concept or the idea of white lights, that kind of brightness, that kind of white light, is not something that people were used to dealing with. Now today we have choices. We can get light bulbs that are daylight bulbs that are the white, or we can get bulbs that will give us the various tints and colors of orangey colors. But John is just mesmerized at the clearness of this vision, the brightness of the light of that city. Yes?
Well, I don't say in the Bible, but could that be the light of Jesus?
Yeah, we're going to see the light of the city. God and the Lamb are the sources of that light. Now, when Paul is writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, he talks about Jesus dwells in a light which no man can approach. And so the implication, of course, is that God is light and in him is no darkness. And so the light of God, when Moses came down off of the mount from receiving the commandments, he had been in the presence of God and he was glowing and he scared them. And of course, he'd scare me if I ran into him in a dark night. I mean, you can imagine a guy walking through the camp of Israel and he didn't need a light because his face was lighting the pathway for him. And that was kind of scary that he was glowing, and they made him put a veil on his face. When we look at the Mount of Transfiguration, we see Jesus there, we see Moses, we see Elijah, and they were in this light. And of course, we know God was there also, because when Peter said, "Let us make 3 tabernacles," God said, "This is my beloved Son, whom I'm well pleased, hear ye him." And so they saw this transfigured type light, or were looking into that realm. So yes, God is the light. A lot of times people will say, well, in the beginning, if there wasn't a sun and God said, "Let there be light," where did the light come from? Well, it came from God. He called up the light out of the darkness. And so eventually we have the sun and the moon and those kind of things. So we have this, what he calls crystal light, this beautiful white, clear light. and the ability to see in ways that in this vision John has never really been able to see before, and something we might think of today by some of what we see. But we see that it had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and we're told the names were written thereon, the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And so if you think about this in light of the way in which going back to the tabernacle and the encampment in the wilderness, which is said to be a type and shadow, well, in that type and shadow, in the center was God. And of course, we work out. And the camps of Israel, there were 3 camps on each of the north, east, south, and west. And so we have that same kind of image that what was again portrayed in the tabernacle and the encampment of Israel in times old. We see the truer part of that and what they represented when they were there. And we have the 12 tribes of Israel written on those gates. Now, in Jesus dealing with the woman of Samaria, in John 4:22, he says, "Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews." And so to the Samaritans, Jesus' idea was that, again, they didn't quite have it together. And the image that we have, that salvation is of the Jews, again, we go back to following the lineage through Luke or some of those other places. And of course, starting with Adam and Eve and working ourselves down to Abraham, and then working ourselves down to Judah and working through the tribe of Judah and getting to David and Solomon and all of those, we end up with Jesus, who is the author and finisher of our faith. And so salvation is of the Jews. It's not that there is no salvation for the Gentile, because he'll talk about the nations later. But the point of all of that is that God worked through the children of Israel to bring about salvation. And so access to the city comes through one of 12 access points. And each one of those access points has on it the name of an apostle. Now, we're going to say there's 13 apostles, right? There's 13 apostles and 12 gates. But, how many apostles were there on the day of Pentecost? 12. Matthias replaced Judas. There was 12. So there were 12 apostles when the church was established. When the kingdom came, there was 12 apostles. Each one of those 12 apostles, becomes symbolic of the fact that, again, we have the New Jerusalem, and of course there's the tribes of Israel. And those apostles all came from one of the 12 tribes. I'm not saying each one of them came from a different tribe, but they all came from Israel. And there were 12 apostles. And so when we look here at the 12 apostles and we think about the 12 tribes of Israel, and a lot of people say, well, Paul was an apostle, but let's back up a little bit. How did Paul become a Christian before he even became an apostle? He was taught by Ananias, right? I mean, Ananias came to him, and where did Ananias learn about the gospel? I don't know. But if you run that backwards, where are you going to end up? You're going to end up with one of the 12 apostles, which are also representative of the 12 tribes of Israel, all coming together. And so even though Paul was the 13th apostle, his apostleship came as the byproduct of one of the other 12 apostles. Now, if you follow his spiritual genealogy back, Ananias begot Saul of Tarsus. He taught him, baptized him, did those things. And then if you follow Ananias back and who taught and baptized him and who taught and baptized him, eventually you're going to get back to Peter standing up with the other 11 on the day of Pentecost and preaching the gospel. And as a byproduct of all of that, everyone came into the church.
I'm thinking of Stevens that got stoned. He was one. So when he got stoned to death, would they still keep his name on the...
Stephen wasn't an apostle. He was one of the deacons. Do what?
I thought he was going to be one.
But Stephen was not an apostle, so he was a deacon. He was a deacon. He was appointed as one of the 7. He was a deacon, but he wasn't an apostle.
Now, we are also assumed that Paul witnessed that too, right?
Witnessed what?
Stephen.
Yeah, he was standing there he watched the clothes. They put their coats at a young man's feet whose name was Saul. But the whole idea of this is that when the 12 apostles were told to stay there in Jerusalem until the power of the Holy Spirit came, from those 12 came everybody else who's ever obeyed the gospel one way or the other, if you back up their spiritual genealogy through all of that. So salvation is of the Jews, and again it was worked out through the 12 tribes of Israel, and it was worked out through the 12 apostles. And so salvation and the ability to enter into eternity, all of that, and when we study in Hebrews 9, it tells us that the blood of Christ again cleansed those who were under the first covenant as well as those who were after the others. And so we have the connection here of both the Old and the New Testament working together, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. All of that's, again, working together to bring about. And again, are these things literal? Is there actually a name written on that? Again, I don't know. But the point of all of that is that through these pearly gates, we all talk about the pearly gates, anyone coming through the pearly gates comes through one of the gates that symbolically has the name of Israel on it, because salvation is of the Jews. Jesus was Jewish. And so, again, we have them on the various points of the compass. We're told that the wall of the city had 12 foundations. And again, the names of the apostles were also written there. Ephesians 2:20 talks about the church and part of it based on the foundation of the apostles. And of course, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. And so we have those images in the scripture. And so he sees this city coming down with 12 foundations, 12 gates. And again, 12, we're going to find 12 all through here, multiples of that. The city, we're told, he that talked with me, that's the angel, had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. The city lieth foursquare. It's a cube. The length is as large as the breadth, and he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and breadth and height of it are equal, foursquare. It's a cube, at least in what this image is that John sees. 12,000 furlongs is equal to about 1,500 miles. And so the length and the breadth and the height is 1,500 miles. And so again, to kind of think of it as a cube, all sides being equal. For us to get a mental idea of what that would look like, if you can in your mind, imagine a map of the United States. If you move over to the Mississippi River, I'm backwards from you, the Mississippi River to California, it's about 1,500 miles. And if you take the borders of Canada and Mexico, it's about 1,500 miles. And so if you're trying to figure out how big this city is, that kind of helps you. And not only is it 1,500 miles wide and 1,500 miles long, but it's also 1,500 miles high. Now, that's further than from ground here into space, because generally speaking, 300 miles or less from ground level, sea level, 300 miles up into space is about as far as all our satellites, the space station, all that stuff operates. And so 1,500 miles would be in a phenomenal amount of height. And so John is looking at this, and he's trying to put that into perspective. And so if you want to talk about just square mileage, that's 2.25 million square miles. So again, like I said, if you only had 144,000 going in this, and it's got 2.25 million square miles, you could live out eternity and not necessarily have to see anybody else, because 144,000 goes into 2.25 million a couple times. And so, again, the thought or the idea, and we've addressed this previously, but there was numbers that were not able. There was this innumerable company of angels that we see mentioned in the book of Hebrews in this city, the New Jerusalem, whose builder and maker is God. So if we think about this in, again, cubic miles, that's 3.4 billion with a B, 3.4 billion cubic miles inside that. That's with a B, not with an M. And that's miles, not feet, that's miles. And so within that cube, and again, I don't necessarily say it has to be taken literally, but I'm just saying in this vision of the city, when Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions, many dwelling places," and you have to understand that in this image, the New Jerusalem comes down to the new earth, and apparently the new earth is bigger than the New Jerusalem, so you got to take into consideration, that's just the city. That's the city where, again, everything is to start with. And the question, of course, is what do we do with the rest of the earth? What are we going to do with that? In this image, there's the new heaven, there's the new earth, and in the middle of that new earth is this 1,500 square mile cubed city, which is now resting here for John to take a look at. And John witnesses that. He says, come down from a high mountain. So if he witnesses the city coming down from a high mountain, how high is the mountain? Again, I don't know. But the whole image of this is something extremely large. And so if you did like most developers do, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but let's just imagine that we've got this 1,500 by 1,500 by 1,500 mile cube that we want to develop. Again, just to put it into perspective, the ceiling here is roughly about 15 feet from the floor up to the top, somewhere thereabouts. So let's say in the new heaven, God gives us a dwelling place that has a ceiling that's 15 feet high. We would be able to cut slices in those floors. If we were developers, like a skyscraper, floor on top of floor on top of floor, if we did that, it would be almost 500,000 stories. 500,000 stories with a 15-foot high ceiling. Now again, do you take this literally? And of course the 15 feet that I'm giving you is not even in here, but I'm trying to get it into some kind of perspective. Can you imagine living in a skyscraper where there are 500,000 floors? And those floors are 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles. And even if it wasn't all developed into that, if you, again, you've got the street of gold, you've got where God is, you've got the river of, we're going to see these other, we see the river of the water of life freely flowing out from the throne of God, and we see the trees on both sides of that, which are planted there. So it's not all, again, buildings, whatever that city's made out of. But I just want you to think about, when people say things, crazy things like heaven's full. Now remember, this is the new heaven and the new earth. And if there's a new heaven and a new earth, that means that, again, we're still not talking about whatever the universe is. Now, scientists are still scratching their head over what the universe is. But when we look through the various telescopes that's out there, we see millions and millions and millions and billions of places that are far from us. And so, again, just like this heaven and earth that we see here, God, as far as eternity is concerned, is still outside. Though he may make his presence known, just like Jesus came in the flesh, he may make his presence known. That doesn't still take away the fact that God still exists beyond and outside of all of these things. And so again, whatever the new heaven and the new earth is, it still incorporates a considerable amount. Just right now, in, again, what we have found and seen in the solar system of stars and planets and all of that, I mean, we can't feel, if everybody who's ever lived were going to heaven, it still wasn't going to be able to fill this up. And so, it's one of those things where there's plenty of room. Salvation is free and available to all. And I think the whole idea of this in reading it, especially from John's perspective, John's time is to stand there with your jaw hanging down, just completely overwhelmed with the beauty, the color, the light, the clear gold. Now, I don't know in John's day if they had the sheets of gold leaf thinned out to where, but again, we know today we can thin gold leaf down to where it's clear. And John says he saw these golden streets, and he says, nonetheless, they were clear. Well, we know that it's possible to roll gold out enough that it has a transparent nature. A lot of things gold we think of as being very solid and very opaque, but it can be rolled out to where it is clear enough that you can put it on a window and you can look out the window, that the window's still clear. And so the wall of the city is again surrounded by a wall, and we're told that the wall thereof is 144 cubits tall. And it says, according to the measure of a man, so is that of an angel. And so this wall is over 200 feet tall that surrounds the city. And so, again, to try to get a perspective, everybody's seen the image of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem from Mount Olives. I think everybody can, immediately get that. And you see how tall the foundation is there at the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is only about 62 feet high. So the wall around this city is 3 times higher than the Temple Mount area there in Jerusalem. And so the idea of all this is of providing security, but at the same time there's no real need, and it has everything it needs to provide safety and security. The only thing is there's not going to be anything that's going to, need all of that. And for that matter, we see that the gates are not closed by day or by night through the process of time. The gates are open constantly. Even though there's angels there at the gates, it's interesting that in the beginning, when man was cast out of the garden, God put cherubims at the entrance into the garden to guard the way to the tree of life, lest we stretch forth our hand and eat of the tree and live forever in sin. But in the New Jerusalem, these angels are not standing at the gates of the city to keep you out, but they're there to welcome you in. They're there to rejoice with you that your name was written in the Lamb's book of life. Instead of now keeping you away from the tree of life, they're there to greet you and invite you into that city. This city built four square, that song that we sing sometimes about the city built four square.
What about the other song? 50 miles of elbow room.
Yeah. Now there's 50 miles worth of elbow room. I mean, when you take all this into consideration. And again, we don't really know what all God has planned for us. We know that, again, from this picture, we have this new heaven, and then there is this new earth, and sort of the capital of this new earth is the New Jerusalem, where God will dwell with his people and be there. But there's still this new earth that we don't know what we're going to do with. Will we all live in that city forever? I don't know. Will we expand out into that new earth? I don't know. When the new Jerusalem comes down, there's this river of water that flows out of it, at least symbolically there, like the fountain of water that sprang up there in the Garden of Eden, and from there it separated into 4 great rivers that went out to water the earth. And so, again, even though there isn't any seas, there doesn't necessarily mean that there might not be the possibility in this new heaven and new earth to develop and to grow. We're reminded that this is not the end. This is not the end, but this is only the beginning. The coming of the new heaven and the new earth, the entrance of the saved into this eternal state, now we think about that as the end, but really that's just the beginning. And so that's just the start of whatever it is God has prepared for us in that new heaven and that new earth, and with that new Jerusalem that's there. Of these different foundations, as we kind of bring to a close, we'll kind of pick up here next week. But in these in these foundations, we see all these different colors. Now, the stones that are listed here are not the same order as the breastplate of the high priest that we talked about in the early part of the book of Revelation. But there is all of these colors which again produce what we think of as a rainbow of colors, very colorful, filled with all kinds of delights to rejoice in. The problem with these descriptions is when the book of Revelation was written, the people reading it knew what the color of these stones were, considered to be unordinary. But the problem is these stones have all kinds of different colors associated with them. What color is garnet? Now, I know it's not listed here, but what color is garnet? Is it? There's a garnet. What color is that? So when we look at this list of stones, every one of these stones, what color is opal? I don't have one of those. But what color is opal? Sometimes. There's also black opal, which is just as black as this, but it has all those sparkle pearlescent things in it. So we have a list here of 12 stones, and each one of them would probably put together make a rainbow. But when we began to look at various writings about what color a particular stone was, it really depends on what, again, time. We today think of garnet as red. And so if you ask someone to make you a garnet ring, and you show up at the jeweler's and you have that, you would generally call that what? Emerald. But that's not an emerald. It's not an emerald stone. It's a garnet. And so, again, we would say emerald's, that's an emerald. Well, no, it's a garnet. And so we have various stones that have everything from yellows and oranges and pinks and again. And so the point of all of this is that, we don't know exactly what the colors in these foundations are, but we can pretty much, in other descriptions of heaven, it's always about the rainbow. And the foundation, that's the rainbow. And when we think about the rainbow was under God's throne and it was in the sky and it became a symbol of the pact. Yes?
Is that the same type of colors that was on Aaron's breastplates?
What's that?
The gems?
Again, on some of those, the colors are still up in the air, what the actual color was. We know what the stone was, but the color of the stone, the Jews have a breastplate with these different colors in it, but whether those are the original colors of the stones that were used, we
Just
don't.
wondering whether it was the same, it might be the same name, all of it.
But the colors may, and you will find that if you look through various books about the breastplate of Aaron, you'll see that some of the colors of the stones change because when whoever was doing that particular picture, to them this stone is this color, while to somebody else the stone is another. And so if you didn't see the original breastplate, you might not know exactly what the color pattern of that is. Our time's up for this morning. Thank you for your time.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.